right, welcome back everyone. This is the Happy Toolbox, and this week we are diving into some 3D modeling tips, specifically around spherical objects. A lot of times when you are modeling a spherical object like a baseball, soccer ball, tennis ball, etc., you try to merge different pieces of geometry you've made. You end up putting them together, trying to sub-D modify them. You end up getting kind of wonky shapes that aren't actually spherical. You get pinches on the edges once you put these together. And so I am here to troubleshoot that with you, and we're going to wind up with something like I have here on the right. So if you're interested in a couple of these quick tips, stick around. All right, here we go. All right, so I brought my geometry into a new scene. I didn't want to bother with you watching me have to make this, since this is more about troubleshooting than anything. But the quick version of it, I just made a sphere, scaled it up. I changed it from a standard to a hexahedron, and then I basically stamped it down, moved points around, deleted points to get to that shape. So you can kind of see how I got to that point. But the main reason I'm using this geometry is not perfect. So if I'm making a tennis ball, I kind of want these two halves, right? So I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to rotate it around to 180, then to 90. And you can see this geometry doesn't line up. If I look at the side view, it's not super spherical. It's almost there, but it kind of has a little bit of a cubic shape going on there just from how I modeled it. And so with that, the first tip I want to show you is how to kind of reform your geometry back to a spherical shape. And this is a lot easier than you think. This is a really old way to do this inside of Simo 4D, but it works super well. And so what you want to do is you want to create a new sphere and kind of size that up similar to your geometry, and then call it, let's say, reference, and then pump the segments up a ton so it's a really, really smooth object, right? And then I'm going to hide this object, and then for each of these spherical parts, I am going to go into my modifiers and grab a shrink wrap. I'm going to stack that under my first spherical side and pull my ref down into the target object. And you can immediately see it kind of morphed and snapped. And then I'm just going to control drag that shrink wrap into my other sphere. And already we are getting a closer to a spherical object than before. So if I turn my reference sphere on, we're getting pretty dang close to this. The more geometry you have, the better shrink wrap works. But in this instance, it's a really nice way to get closer to that shape without doing a lot of pushing and pulling of points. So that is the first tip. And then the second tip here is you can see my geometry does not line up perfectly. Now, you could stamp this whole thing down. You could weld all these points one by one, but a kind of shortcut to welding points that I like to use is something called the connect object. So if I go in here, I can grab a connect object, grab my two spherical sides, stack those into a null, and then stack that null inside of a connect object. Now, nothing really happens here because the tolerance is super low. And this really only works if you have geometry kind of lined up, but I'm assuming, again, if you're trying to 3D model this object, your geometry is somewhat lined up and it'll serve you a lot better in the long run. But if I bump this tolerance up, nothing really happens. It looks like, oh, I can only go to 1. But with the connect object, you can actually go a lot further. So let's say I put 10 in. You saw those points immediately snapped and kind of welded to each other. If I push this even further to like 15, we got that point too. So now our points are welded and it's still all non-destructive currently, which is really nice. So I'm going to push this further, see if I can get these last two. And I pushed it to 20 and it kind of broke. So that is where it's going to break. That's the best we can do, but that's pretty good because we only have, 2 or 3 spots that we actually need to weld from here. Okay, so now that I have that done and my object is much more spherical and I'm a lot happier with it, I'm going to merge all of this down. But before I do that, I am going to grab a selection tag for each of these objects because I still want to be able to texture them. I still want to be able to potentially split them off if I'm doing any type of dynamics in the future. So I'm going to just select all on the polygons on sphere 1. I'm going to go up to select and say store selection. And I'm going to call that face 1. And then I'm going to do the same thing to my other side. select store selection, face 2. And then from there, I'm going to go up to my connect object and I'm just going to stamp it down by hitting C. And now you'll see it took those 2 pieces of geometry and I was able to still maintain my selection tags here, which is really great. But it did weld the objects together that we wanted it to, except for those few points. So let's go ahead and fix those points up. I'm gonna grab the 2 points. MQ is a shortcut for your weld tool. Grab that. Let's see, sometimes just to see what geometry I'm missing, I just stack it inside of a subdivision modifier and you'll see where it breaks right away. Like there's a little pinch, so I'm gonna go over, grab it. It's just a good little testing tool for it. Okay, so from here, the next step I want to do is I want kind of that seam going through our geometry like I showed in the beginning. And so the way we do that is we go over to our polygons and we select one of our faces with our selection tag. And I'm going to right click and go to inset. I think I'm going to inset this to about a 6. And then I'm going to add 1 subdivision. So that way I get this nice little row going on. And then I'm going to select my other selection tag, select, and do the same thing to this side. So inset, do 6, it's already stored with 1 subdivision. So I'm going to hit UL, that's loop selection. I'm going to select the 2 inner seam pieces that we created in that subdivision. And then I'm going to go up to select, store selection, just so I have those. That way I can color those, I can do whatever I need to do with them, I can split them off, etc. It's just really nice to do that before you start messing with geometry. Okay, so now that we have those, what's really nice is, yes, I could, scale this, etc., but this is a little bit hard to control in my opinion. I might scale it down, see how that looks with the subdivision surface on it. It's looking pretty nice, but now I have to go back, kind of scale it back up. There's just a percentage value in the center that I don't really like. So if you want to be a little bit more specific, something that's really nice to do is right clicking and going down to something called normal move. And what's really nice is this is something that you can incrementally change. So let's say I want this at like 8, maybe too deep, 6. So that's feeling pretty good. I'm liking how that's feeling. And then if I put this inside of a subdivision surface, I get that really nice seam and it is still a spherical object. And then at any time, I can always go back to my selection tag of that seam and go down to normal move. And I can, change this to whatever value I want, which is really nice to be able to control that. And if you're finding your geometry is a little bit still too non-spherical, you can always use that same trick again, which is using that same reference sphere that's really high poly. Now that our object is stacked under a subdivision surface, it is technically in the eyes of Cinema 4D very high poly. And so what I can do is I can get a null, I can stack our subdiv surface under that null, and then grab another shrink wrap object, put that inside of there, and then make sure I grab our target object. And it'll kind of go crazy because it's at 100%. But if you pump the strength up, you get to kind of mess with it further. And sometimes it has a pretty cool effect on the actual seam of the object as well. So you can pump this up and you almost get this kind of tighter looking seam, which I really like. Okay, so that is pretty much it. I just wanted to show you a quick couple tips and tricks on how I force objects back to a spherical nature and kind of how I deal with seams when 3D modeling objects like this. If you would like this video and subscribe to the channel, that would help me out a ton. It really helps get the word out about videos I'm trying to put out weekly. And as always, if you're interested in any 3D models, head on over to thehappytoolbox.com. We have this new icons pack. It's just really simple, nice, clean icons that you can use in your projects when you are not learning to 3D model yourself. All right, I'll see you next time.